residential school to be established so that we would be educated, in his words, in 1910, so that we would be able to compete on better terms with the whites. And by 1910, he realized that the residential school wasn't doing its job. As a matter of fact, all of its policies were aimed at cultural assimilation. And one of the driving forces behind that approach was an individual by the name of Duncan Campbell Scott. He was a bureaucrat within the Department of Indian Affairs for 50 years and acted as a deputy minister of the Department of Indian Affairs for 20 years. And so critical components of the issue we're dealing with today, finding unmarked graves and missing children, are a direct result of those early policies. And I just want to read you a couple of quotes of his. It is readily
Maggie, do you know if we lost Maggie?
Yeah, it looks like he might have just cut out. Let's hold tight for a minute and just see.
okay. Okay, are we on? Sorry about.
Yep, we can hear you. Thanks.
Okay, sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah, so, and this led to, he was also the author of making sure that children over the age of 7 became a ward of the federal government. And that meant that the federal government could come into our homes and take away children. And, it's all without irony that I'm speaking to you from the former residential school site. This is where my offices are, the headquarters of the First Nations Tax Commission. And of course, there is a former residential school, which I visited on the Six Nations Reserve. And so these are issues that are going to impact each one of our communities. There's over I think there was about 157 residential schools across the country. And so what was found here in my community undoubtedly will be found in other residential schools across the country. And it is a direct result of this individual by the name of Duncan Campbell Scott. He also was instrumental in making sure that we lost our fiscal powers. And by fiscal powers, I mean taxes, TAKSIS. And that's the Chinook way of spelling the tax jurisdiction. The young lady before me was saying that she was from Alaska and lived in Seattle. We spoke, all of us here in the Pacific Northwest from Northern California to Alaska, a trade language called Chinook. And so it's important to recognize that we carried on market-based economies from traditional times. We had extensive trade networks throughout the Americas. Here in the Pacific Northwest, we call those the grease trails for Ooligan grease from the coastal areas over to the prairies. And so we're familiar with the economies. As a matter of fact, we wouldn't have been able to live on these lands for many years. And so that came to an end for us here in Canada when Duncan Campbell Scott in March of 1927 amended the Indian Act so that we would no longer be able to collect taxes. In those days, we collected taxes not only from ourselves, but also from those that we did business with. And that came to an end, making us forever, as he did in 1920, a ward of the federal government, completely dependent on transfers from the federal government for community infrastructure, roads, houses, and looking after ourselves in the way of education and health care services. And so all of this goes back to that point in time. And the other thing that happened, which is critically important for us here in Canada, was the advent of the federal and provincial governments working together to take away our title, particularly here in British Columbia, but it's very clear right across the country. And so what happened is there was a court case in Nigeria, which happened to be part of the British Empire. They went to the Supreme Court of England, which was the Exchequer Court of the Privy Council in London. And Canada was asked to make a reference for our court case. So the First Nations here in British Columbia were preparing to challenge the Canadian and provincial title to our lands. And of course, because of the amendment in 1927, we couldn't raise money on our own. We couldn't hire lawyers. We couldn't leave the reserve. We had to ask permission to leave reserves. We couldn't sell any of our produce anymore. And this led to ultimately the taking away of our title to our lands. And so when we look at the role of First Nations and what you say here, Indigenous economics and reclaiming the sacred, one of the things that we have to resolve are those fundamental questions. And I look at the issue that we're facing now, particularly with the fines of the possibility of 215 little ones. The reason that they weren't sent home is because the Department of Indian Affairs, through the policies of Duncan Campbell Scott, refused to fund the returning of any children that were sick or any children that had passed away. And that ultimately led to a situation, a heinous situation, where children were buried in unmarked graves without ceremony, without care and due respect for their lives, in my opinion. And then the other thing that happened, of course, is because we couldn't pursue our land question anymore, we're still having to struggle for a true fiscal relationship in this country. And so when we think about what's happened globally over the last little bit, of course, it's COVID-19. And, we've lived through many, many pandemics over many, many centuries now. And so we've proven that we're a very resilient people, not only in Alaska, but here in British Columbia and right across this whole big country and this whole big continent. And so these are fundamental questions, because if we're dealing with the missing, not only the children that are missing here on our lands here in Kamloops, but the murdered and missing women inquiry, all of these, in my view, are missing. And the reason that we'll never, ever stop that tragedy is without fundamental jurisdictions. If we've got to be able to reclaim our rightful place, and that means dealing in a very fundamental way through truth, the seeking of truth behind the Truth and Reconciliation Commission dealing with residential schools. And that means fully implementing the sections 71 through 76, which deal specifically with the missing children and unmarked graves. And this is a national tragedy that all of us as First Nations here in Canada, and indeed in the United States, have to deal with, because that's where the concept of residential schools started. And so that's fundamental. And when we start to address that, of course, we have to deal with in our particular case, the Catholic Church. And we have to call them into account. But it isn't just simply about asking for an apology, because what happens after you get an apology? That'll be it. What we have to do is work with the church to make sure that they're making reparations for our communities, in particular, those that have survived residential schools. So it isn't just about an apology, it's about a whole approach in working with former institutions like the Catholic Church who've perpetrated, incredible situations that our children had to suffer through: sexual abuse, physical abuse, and the like. But it isn't just about access, even files that they may have. It's more complex than that. And the other thing that we have to work together on is making sure that we have fiscal powers. I've, as stated, I promote taxation, and that's an unpopular word here in Canada. Even in the United States, on the prairies, they say the T word we like to use is treaty. But without taxation powers, which is fundamental to government and land, we'll always be dependent on someone else. Otherwise, we'll be getting secondhand taxes through programs. And even today, we're having to, I noticed Chief Mark Hill from Six Nations asking for $10 million to find missing children that are attached to the residential school there. You're going to hear this echoed right across the country. I'm not a fan of programs, because programs beget other programs, and it happens under somebody else's jurisdiction. Right on the Six Nations Reserve, Grand River Enterprises generates over $300 million in excise tax for the federal government. Those are monies that are a hidden tax that all of us pay right across the country. So taxation, we've been able to generate millions of dollars for First Nation communities. But even despite that, because we don't have the complete fiscal powers that I feel we should have, the federal and provincial governments collect 7 times more than First Nations do on our own lands. And that has to fundamentally change. The Canadian government has to quit herding us into 2 sections. Either you're in a self-government discussion or in a modern treaty discussion, and that only leads to generational discussions. Those discussions that I've watched here in British Columbia, they are indeed generational. They're taking 20 years to solve. We don't have that type of time, given a post-COVID world when healthcare is going to be critically important. So jurisdiction is at the top of my mind when we think about these issues. And it can't be just restricted to our reservations or reserve lands. We have to be able to have jurisdiction that extends within our traditional territories, within our treaty territories. And that only then we can begin to deal with what I call the indefeasible crown, meaning the federal and provincial governments. And it's only when we have the sufficient jurisdiction that we'll be able to address a lot of the issues that are plaguing our people right now, building the kinds of institutions that will facilitate a true market-based economy. And in order to do that, we have to have title to our own lands. It can't be owned by Her Majesty. We've got to be able to have all of the institutions that the rest of the Canadian and American citizens take for granted that facilitate a true market-based approach in dealing with trade. And we're no strangers to that. You know, even now when people are talking about a green economy, that's what our economies were based on. They were always sustainable economies, taking into account, the fisheries that the young lady was talking about in Alaska. We too, here in Shuswap country, have one of the largest sockeye runs in Canada. And that comes right up the Fraser River, through the Thompson River, and up to Adams Lake. And so those have to be protected. But we lost the Upper Fraser salmon run. And that was a full half of our food that was taken away due to logging practices. And so that's my message, is that we have to work together collectively as First Peoples of this land. We have to extend, as I have, a friendly hand. I work with the Maori in South Island of New Zealand. We've also begun to work with the Bank of Canada, the Bank of New Zealand, the Bank of Australia, the Federal Reserve Bank in Minneapolis, St. Paul, the Federal Reserve Bank in St. Louis, because Indigenous people have to be a fundamental part of the economy. And that means all of the institutions have to be able to make space for us, jurisdictional space. And one of the things that we've been striving to do at the former residential school site here in Kamloops, which we call the Chief Louis Center, We're building a complex that has a heritage park, a museum, a powwow arbor, which seats about 2,500 people. We have a governmental complex that includes the First Nations Tax Commission, the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, the bureaucracy of the Kamloops Indian Band or Tecumloops. We have other potential developments here. We're looking at creating a campus on the complex. It's about 160 acres in total, looking at ways and means for us to have an Indigenous-led new way of thinking about resolving our issues, which is economic. For too long, we've been learning about how to manage poverty. We have to begin to learn how to create wealth and maintain wealth. And to end my presentation, I want to read you a poem that was written by a good friend of mine, Dennis Saddleman, who I attended the residential school here with. I was just this last week, there was a residential school day scholar settlement. And even with that settlement, I think about Omar Cotter, who got $10.5 million, and all of us have been, offered $10,000, take it or leave it kind of an approach. I hate you, residential school. I hate you. You're a monster. I hate you. I hate you. I hate you. 33 years later, I rode my Chevy pony to Kamloops. From the highway, I saw the monster. My God, the monster is still alive. I hesitated. I wanted to drive on, but something told me to stop. I parked in front of the residential school in front of the monster. The monster saw me and it stared at me. The monster saw me and I stared back. We both never said anything for a long time. Finally, with a lump in my throat, I said, "Monster, I forgive you." The monster broke into tears. The monster cried and cried. His huge shoulders shook. He motioned me to come forward. He asked me to sit on his lappy stairs. The monster spoke. "You know, I didn't like my government father. You know, I didn't like my Catholic church mother. I'm glad the Native people adopted me. They took me as one of their own. They fixed me up and repaired my mouth of double doors, washed my window eyes with cedar and fir boughs. They cleansed me with sage and sweetgrass. Now my good spirit lives. The Native people let me stay on their land. They could have burnt me, Instead, they let me live. So people can come here to school to restore and to learn about their culture." The monster said, "I'm glad Native people gave me another chance. I'm glad, Dennis, you gave me another chance." The monster smiled. I stood up and I told the monster I must go. Ahead of me is my life. My people are waiting for me. I was at the door of my Chevy pony. The monster spoke. "Hey, you forgot something." I turned around and saw a ghost child running down the cement steps. It ran towards me and entered my body. I wasn't looking at a monster anymore. I was looking at an old school. In my heart, I thought, this is where I earned my diploma of survival. I was looking at an old residential school who became my elder of my memories. I was looking at tall buildings with 4 stories, stories of hope, stories of dreams, stories of renewal, and stories of tomorrow. And that poem for me encapsulates very clearly how our people of the Americas are resilient. And it's only through working through our collective efforts that we will be able to reclaim our rightful place in the Americas. And it isn't just about working between First Nations here in Canada and tribes in the United States. It's reaching out a hand of goodwill and cooperation to all of our brothers and sisters throughout the Americas, because we've all been infected by the colonization throughout the Americas. And just think about the gifts we've given to the world. Think about the Vatican, with the Pieta. Just that alone is incredible. The Sistine Chapel. All of those were built with the wealth that was generated here in the Americas. So when I think about the way forward, it's about claiming our rightful jurisdiction so that we don't have to be beggars in our own lands, that we don't have to be asking somebody else for a program, that we can do it through fiscal powers, and that we harness the imagination, our collective imagination of our youth. Because one of the most fundamental things that we can offer to the world is innovation. And you as young people are our future innovators. Think, imagine. Think about these last four words, last four things. Stories of hope, stories of dreams, stories of renewal, and stories of tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Wow. Oh, so powerful. I just needed a minute to collect myself. Speaking of residential schools is really, I'm sure it's we're all affected. We're all touched in some way. I worked at the Woodland Cultural Center, the former residential school of Brantford, so I'm very familiar with a lot of the things that you said resonated with me. And I just want to extend my gratitude and much love to you and your community at this time. Yeah, that was a really powerful poem too. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to introduce our next panelist, Zane Nyami. He was born in a hardworking Ismaili family in Karachi, Pakistan. Zane relocated from Pakistan to Coast Salish territory in Vancouver to pursue his Master of Business Administration at Simon Fraser University. After moving to Canada and witnessing Indigenous peoples living in the consequences of colonization and ongoing systemic oppression, he was deeply affected, especially as someone from a previously colonized country himself. To gain better understanding of the issues and be part of the solution, Zane immersed himself as an intern, working with the Kwekwektun Kanaka Bar Band. Driven by his passion to work with communities who want to become self-sufficient while challenging the status quo in the wake of the climate crisis, Zane established ZN Advisory in 2013, a consulting practice that partners with Indigenous communities and organizations to build resilient systems through offering governance, strategy and planning, management, and capacity building services. Zane is an affiliate of the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants and has been a fellow since 2017. He is also a member of the Chartered Professional Accountants of BC in Canada and Certified Aboriginal Financial Manager through AFOA Canada. So with that, I'll send it over to you, Zane.
Awesome. Thanks, Lindsay. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone's feeling great. I understand that this is the last presentation. I couldn't agree more with everything that was said by the two panelists before me. And I have no idea how to go after and present after Chief Manny Jules here, but I'll try. I'll give it my best shot. Thank you, ICA, for allowing us to present this presentation. I'm here representing Tlachtamo, or Kanaka Bar as it's known today. And my association with the community goes back to 2012 when I started as an intern and just was fascinated by the amount of knowledge, the wealth that existed in the community and the vision that existed in the community. It attracted me so much that 9 years later, I'm still involved, perhaps in a different capacity, but I'm still very much involved in the community. I was supposed to be presenting or co-presenting this presentation with Chief Patrick Michel here, but he's had some deaths in his family, 5 to be exact, over this past 2-week period, and he's attending and supporting his family at this moment. But he did give us a bit of a recording of this presentation that we'll be sharing after this conference is over through social media. Before I do get started with my presentation here, I do want to pay respect to what Chief Manny Jules talked about, the Kamloops tragedy, the incident. as a non-Indigenous person and as a person of color, as they say, as if white is not a color, I don't know if I have the right to say it, but I feel like it's not the story of the past. It is something that is still very much happening in the present. The form has changed as far as I can see, as far as my experiences tell me, but the essence still exists. And the people present at this conference, people participating in this conference over the last 3 days, I think you've got the power to change that. So I guess let's just continue to move forward, and let's change what's happening within the bureaucracy of this country and the bureaucracy of the world out there, because we do need the vision of Indigenous people. I personally believe that we do need that to fight with changes such as climate change, right? That's the topic of the conference. That's the organizers here. So with that, I'll move to the next slide. Who and where is Kanakabar Tlahtamo? Tlahtamo is part of the Nkaktmo Nation, which is essentially made of 15 distinct Indigenous communities. Formerly, it was 69 communities, but then Indian Act happened and a lot of amalgamation happened at the same time. You can see the nation's boundary in the map on your left-hand side in red. And within that nation boundary is a purple polygon that you see. And that's Tlahtamo, that's Kanakabar's traditional territory, which kind of spans on both sides of Fraser River that Chief Manny Jules talked about earlier. Today, the community is restricted in what was created in 1876, the reserve system in Canada, and you can see that in the little circle on the right-hand side of your screen. The community is located in the Fraser Canyon, 14 kilometers south of Lytton, and approximately 3 hours from Vancouver. The community, however, has lived in this purple polygon that you're seeing on the screen for over 8,000 years, and we've got archaeological data to support those conversations, which kind of confirms the history, the culture, the language, the governance system of Tlahtamo, the Crossing Place people. Now, how did Kanakabar manage to do that? How did any Indigenous community manage to do that? Well, this slide, it's got a lot of information, and there's a reason for that. You can take it away after the presentation, but the idea is the community always managed the lands and resources for future generations. It was not about me now more. It was always about the future generation, the younger generations. How do you do that in a sustainable way? There were always protocols, and we've got 4 protocols that we've kind of codified in all of our community planning over the years. We call them the ASK protocol. And one of the speakers before me mentioned something, one of them in her presentation, but basically doing it right, taking only what you need, no more. If you take it in, take it out, clean it up after you're done doing whatever it is that you're doing within our territory. These are the principles. We call them the sustainability principles too. I mean, if you go in academia, that's what they talk about. But this is how Indigenous people, this is how Tlahtamo has always lived and survived and sustained themselves. A very good article that Chief Patrick wrote, Memory, Loss, and Sorrow, the link has been provided here. It kind of elaborates on this concept a little bit more. But what's important here is all of this was kind of impacted with contact. At Kanakabar, that was 1808, and contact really brought in the change. Whole of it was negative, right? With contact came change, and the next 200 years, what we all kind of know, it's been talked about, the period of colonization, it's about oppression, and the immediate and long-term effects that were caused by it. But in 200 years since contact, it's also about industrialization. It's also about globalization. It's also about urbanization, and as a result, the global warming that has been caused by it. And that's the crisis. That's the existential crisis that we are all kind of faced with today, and we got to do something about it. Okay. Well, so We know that global warming is an existential crisis, and at Kanaka Bar, at any Indigenous community, it is challenging the way of life. It's challenging a very sophisticated system that had developed over thousands of years. A simple system that was based on simple concepts such as, well, what you see on the screen here on the top: what you do to the land or allow others to do, you do to yourself. And that's the foundational value that Kanaka has been living with for over 8,000 years. Any Indigenous community, those are the same kind of values. But now, given this crisis that's happening, that's in front of us, Kanaka needed to come up with a new game plan, a plan that saw Kanaka's lands and resources being used in a manner that was self-sufficient, sustainable, and vibrant. And this very thought was the foundation of what Kanaka decided to pursue in terms of building a community resilience plan. And this planning, this thinking process, it goes back to many years. It all kind of started with the community engagement, and what you're seeing on the screen are just some pictures from recent years. But the engagement in a community such as Kanaka, it goes back many years. The value of community members' input has always been recognized, and it's the key to the resilience that we have somehow established today. And for thousands of years, that is precisely how the community lived. And that was the formula for sustainability. Listen to community members, understand what they want to do, and do it as a collective in a way that encourages self-sufficiency, sustainability, and vibrancy of the land and resources around you. And with that formula, Kanaka Bar decided to pursue a new planning cycle in recent years. And that's the idea. That's what we're basically talking about today in terms of community resilience. The pathway that Kanaka Bar chose over the past few decades. What was that? What's the pathway to resilience in Kanaka's term? I personally got involved in the community in 2012, as mentioned before. But the community has been pursuing resilience right after Calder decision in 1973, when they first came up with the idea of developing a hydro project to move away from depending on dollars from the federal government, and in creating that belt that Chief Manny talked about earlier. But that was the start. And in 2012 onwards, what we did was, the community was completing that hydro project, and they felt, well, we need to do something. We need to plan our future next. What are we going to do once all this money is going to come in? How are we going to invest all this money? And that's where this idea of creating some governing codes, which we call the community codes, came in back in 2013, and those codes really it strengthened the community's governance systems. And soon after that, we worked towards a land use plan in 2015. The land use plan was the first time the community actually codified a vision in writing. It's not that there was no vision. That's how Indigenous communities have always survived. But the land use plan was the exercise that we used to codify a vision to live in a self-sufficient, sustainable, and vibrant manner, and using our lands and resources in that very manner. Now that we had that vision, we needed a bit of an implementation plan, and that is where the Community Economic Development Plan came in place, and that was 2016. And you can see the values that the CEDP, the Community Economic Development Plan, in the circle on the top right there. Now, once we created the Community Economic Development Plan in 2016, it gave us a bit of a 5-year mandate to implement the various initiatives that would help us achieve that vision. At the same time, what we also started pursuing was understanding what's happening to the environment around us, what's happening to the lands and resources around us. And we used the vulnerability assessment, the climate change vulnerability assessment back in 2018 to understand what exactly is happening to the lands and resources. And apply all that information in any sort of future planning so that the future generations in the community have the same chance as the people today to sustain themselves. Now, here's another way of just looking at the same information that I talked about, how the community planning has evolved over the years, starting in 2013 with the community codes, the membership, the elections code, the governance code, really strengthened the foundation. Then we've moved to the land use plan, community economic development plan, a climate change vulnerability assessment. And the focus of this presentation today is number 5 there, the community resiliency plan. And we had to do that because the Community Economic Development Plan, which gave us a 5-year outlook back in 2016, came to an end in 2021. And the community needed a new forward-looking plan as to what are we going to do to become resilient. And using all the information that we've generated about whether it's climate change, whether it's organizational systems, how do we want to move forward? And that's where the idea of community resilience plan came into being. And in 2020, we got together as a community, despite of COVID, had several community engagement sessions just like this to address that, to understand where the community wants to go. And as a result, we just recently completed our community resiliency plan and are now in the implementation of it. And that's the summer plan that we have listed here. Now, the CRP, as I mentioned earlier, it's a 5-year implementation plan, and you can visualize it through this tree like image that you're seeing on the screen here. The CRP, the Community Resilience Plan, it's really deeply rooted in the culture and the values and traditions of Kotakmo. The goal of Community Resilience Plan at Kanaka is to make the community more resilient to changes such as climate change or cumulative impacts. And that's the goal here. At the foundation, at the base of this diagram that you see, you can see the existing effort that the community has made to date, and that's giving us a bit of a solid foundation to say this is what we want to do in the future. And the way we are achieving this goal is basically just planning and dividing our entire organization, entire community into smaller, more manageable chunks, which you see as governance in red, lands and resources, health, culture, education, infrastructure, economic development. Every community has those areas that we need to plan, and there might be other areas that you may have, that other communities may have, and this is not a prescription of any sort. This is the formula that worked for Kanaka, and what we did over the last 6 months was we connected with the community on each of those topics and presented what was done over the past few years with respect to each area and what needed to be done in the next little while. So, and that was always the idea of the community resiliency planning exercise. Right now, we are in the implementation of it, and each planning area that you're seeing on this screen is being managed with some guiding principles. And here are the guiding principles. I'm not going to go into details. You'll have this presentation deck to refer to. But these guiding principles were mandated to us by the community during the engagement sessions that took place over the last 6-7 months. They are in no particular order, but these are essentially the values and beliefs with which we are moving forward. It includes values such as involving youth in everything, being proactive about climate change, collaborating with different levels of government if you want to deal with issues such as climate change. And these principles are being applied to each planning area that we saw earlier. And as managers, as leaders now, our job is to simply apply them in every single action, every single priority that we've got in front of us. Now, how did we develop the CRP, the Community Resiliency Plan? Well, obviously, nothing happens without people. So we formed a planning team, and it included the champions from within the community. We had 2 people from within the community, and the job was to just keep the project alive, get people motivated, get people to come and participate in every session, talk about their concerns. And that's super important when we're doing any sort of planning exercises with community, get champions involved. The team, once established, was responsible for the overall planning and coordination of this initiative, of development of the community resiliency plan. They were also responsible to engage with the community through various means, virtual sessions, surveys, phone calls. But during the engagement, community came up with hundreds and hundreds of ideas. Right? I think it was 307 to be exact, over the period of 6 months. These ideas were then refined and prioritized by the planning team as well as the council. And then we took all those ideas back to the community to make sure that we weren't too far off with everything that we had said in the finalized plan. And once the community gave us input, we incorporated that back into the final listing and just said that this is the final project, divided it into short, medium, and long-term priorities. This is just a bit of a summary of what we actually heard over the 6 to 7 months. Engagement sessions. We had 12 engagement sessions, multiple surveys and calls and meetings with community members, and collected 307 raw ideas from community members through that engagement. That's a lot of good material, good information that the community wanted to do to be able to achieve the vision. And then once we had all these ideas, we consolidated them into 182 refined ideas by eliminating duplication and merging the ideas that surfaced in multiple engagement sessions. And one thing that we are proud of is that we didn't eliminate anything that the community came up with in the final plan. We included everything, and we said we're going to do our best to implement everything over the next 5 years. And what's not going to be implemented, we aren't going to forget about that. We will do everything we could potentially to make sure that happens as well. And at the end of the day, we now, after finding all these ideas, we had just over 100 ideas to be implemented over the next 5 years. And what these ideas really do on a day-to-day basis is it gives leadership a bit of a mandate. It gives managers a bit of a direction to follow on a day-to-day basis. So we now know that this is what we need to implement. Well, then let's just implement it and make sure that the community becomes resilient. How did we prioritize all these 100+ ideas? Well, this chart kind of tries to summarize it. We grouped everything first, which was followed by a bit of a prioritization scoring. And within this prioritization scoring, the planning team and council scored each and every idea. All 100 ideas were scored. And the scoring was essentially based on 10 value-based questions that I'll show next. And contribution of an idea to other planning themes. Each idea was kind of scored out of 56 points, and a scale was then used to determine whether the idea would be implemented over a short term, over a medium term, or over the long term. And that kind of led to a finalized version of an implementation plan that gives us a bit of a mandate, a bit of a strategic direction to implement over the next 5 years. And these are the 10 value-based questions that I referred to in the previous slide. These were, again, questions that we came up with, but were extremely critical part of the whole prioritization process, prioritization scoring process. When we were going through the prioritization exercise, we asked ourselves these questions. Every time we looked at an action item, we said, does this support health and well-being at Kanaka Bar? Does it empower Kanaka's youth? And we started scoring every single action based on this chart here. Again, these questions, we took these questions first to the community. We made sure that the community was okay with the way these were structured, and then we applied these questions to all 100 items that we had. And then once we were able to prioritize all those ideas. We took it back to the community and said, well, how does this look to you now? Are we too far off? Do we need to make any changes to it? And then there were a few changes that were made towards the end, and that came out of the community engagement sessions, and helped us finalize the community resiliency plan towards the end. Now, this entire journey, we codified it as best as possible. It's available online in the form of a story map. There's a link that I've included here in yellow where it says story map. Feel free to go and have a look at it. And welcome to kind of share all the information about our journey as much as possible. But the more detailed version of this plan is also available on this website. You're welcome to download it, steal it, use it however you see fit. But what's important now is that we've got a plan, we've got a mandate for the next 5 years, and we're already in the implementation of the first year through the summer plan.
Zane, we're actually just running up. We're out of time for Q&A.
I'm on the last slide. Is that okay?
Okay.
Right.
Yep, that's fine.
Perfect. And I guess I'll just keep it very short here. We've kind of delegated all the different tasks to the different managers that we have. The reporting to the community is essentially every third Thursday. Meet to provide an update on the last 30 days, provide an update for what's going to happen over the next 30 days. But the same reporting is also done on a biannual basis through a summer plan and a winter plan, just to make sure that the community understands what is it that we are doing. Are we even doing what was said in the community resiliency plan? So that's the process of creating a bit of an accountability in the community, and just make sure that everyone's moving forward together as a collective. And that's kind of been the success at Kanaka that we found. Obviously, there are challenges. Wouldn't shy away from acknowledging that. But challenges are good, as Chief Patrick often says. It allows us to do something about them, to resolve them. So that's where we are at. Once again, thank you for the opportunity, and looking forward to the questions here.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're out of time. But if you have email or any other way people can connect with you directly, if you want to share that in the chat, you're more than welcome to. So I think we're going to end here. Thank you so much, Zane, Chief Commissioner, Manny, Jules, and Alexis, for sharing everything that you had to share with us today, and closing out our conference. So I'm joined now again with Ariel to give us some closing words.
Hello, everyone. Once again, Glanate. My name is Ariel, for those that haven't seen me yet, and I'm the Executive Director and co-founder of Indigenous Climate Action. And I just want to thank everyone that has participated and attended the conference over the last 3 days, all of the speakers that joined us and shared their generous wisdom and knowledge with all of us that joined on the Zoom and who viewed on our YouTube channel, and for everyone's, just tremendous thoughts on like really reframing what we can achieve when we broaden the scope of what it means to lean into healing, lean into justice, and really start to value Indigenous knowledge, rights, culture, and cosmology as a framework for how we can build a better future and tomorrow. I also want to ensure that we're thanking all of our great volunteers that are in the background that have helped make sure that this conference has been a success, the conference organizers, the staff at Indigenous Climate Action, who have all been all-stars in showing up on Fridays and Saturday for all of this. I can see my good friend Alexis clapping in the background. It's so nice to see you. I've seen so many familiar faces and so many new faces. And it's just been such an exemplary group of people that have brought forward a narrative that is so desperately needed in a time where we need real change. And I really just want to end on this idea that we have the knowledge. We have the ability to create change. Danica Littlechild, who was one of the founding members of ICA's caucus or steering committee, stated that we don't have to translate ourselves into the colonial frame. We are our own experts, and we have to keep that in mind when we are imagining new economies, new paradigms, and solutions to the crisis. We have to keep that in mind. We are our own experts, and our stories and our knowledge houses the pathway and the map forward. And we're also not static in time. We are not returning to something of the old, but we are building upon the knowledge of our ancestors and those that came before us, taking those stories and lessons and building off of the frameworks that we have learned over the last 500 years and reclaiming the sacred and reclaiming our spaces as Indigenous peoples. And so this has been such a beautiful, beautiful celebration of Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous learning. And I really hope that we can continue these conversations moving forward. There will be one last working group session today after this. I think we'll probably have a small break, but if you want to sign up for those working groups, I believe we'll be putting it in the chat. And it's thanking all of the wonderful speakers like Chief Commissioner Manny Jules, Jess Housty, Zane. I feel like I'm forgetting someone, Alexis. I think that's all the speakers from this afternoon and all the speakers from this morning from the Healing Justice panel. It has just been such a tremendous day. So thank you, Masi Cho. And of course, a big thank you to the Canadian Society for Ecological Economics for really demonstrating what it means to be an ally. And they really supported this conference when we said we needed a space just for Indigenous discussions and not just to be smashed into the annual CANC conference, but to have a space. And they not only provided the resources to make this happen, they supported us with the manpower and really showed up as real allies and standing and supporting us to do this work. And so huge shout out to Sophie and Jody and all the folks at CANC and Kiara and Maggie for making this happen. So Masi Cho, big Masi Cho to all of you. And we started everything with a grounding, a Haudenosaunee grounding. And as Haudenosaunee protocol goes, you close it in the same way. So I'm going to ask Lindsay to close us out one more time with our final grounding. And the grounding sort of prayer that happens with all of this. So thank you so much, Masi Cho.
Ona sawada hon sios kanjoka. Ii gari wa ndakwa ne ohando gari wa dakwa ne gnu hore dunsira. Agwegon Scott Neji and Dedawa West Nuni ne on Guatni Gorna, Dana Diatino Horado name Guesuna, a Tony Du Hawk name Guatni Gorda. Agwegon Scott Neji and Dedawa West Nuni ne on Guatni Gorna, Dana Diatino Horado ne Yatina Saha or Wanja, a Tony Du Hawk name Guatni Gorda. Agwegon Scott Neji and Dedawa West Nuni ne on Guatni Gorna, Dana Diatino Horado ne Gatneguru Nuji Wajade, a Tony Du Hawk name Guatni Gorna. Agwegon Scott Neji and Dedawa West Nuni ne on Guatni Gorna, Dana Diatino Horado ne Gunjuk Sua, Gunjinagre ne Wange, a Tony Du Hawk name Guatni Gorna. Agwegon Scott Neji and Dedawa West Nuni ne on Guatni Gorna, Dana Diatino Horado ne Ohunde Sua. Dahna nene agua tigundigowana ne junhekwa nene honesty o sahera dahna on unsura, a Tony Du Hawk name Guatni Gorna. Agwegon Scott Neji and Dedawa West Nuni ne on Guatni Gorna, Dana Diatino Horado ne Onungo Sua, a Tony Du Hawk name Guatni Gorna. Agwegon Scott Neji and Dedawa West Nuni ne on Guatni Gorna, Dana Diatino Horado ne Gahik Sua, Dahna nene agua tigundigowana ne Niahundessa, a Tony Du Hawk name Guatni Gorna. Agwegon Scott Neji and Dedawa West Nuni ne on Guatni Gorna, Dana Diatino Horado ne Ojit Nua Sua, a Tony Du Hawk name Guatni Gorna. Agwegon Scott Neji and Dedawa West Nuni ne on Guatni Gorna, Dana Diatino Horado ne Gariota Sua, Dahna nene agua tigundigowana ne Osconundo, a Tony Du Hawk name Guatni Gorna. Agwegon Scott Neji and Dedawa West Nuni ne on Guatni Gorna, Dana Diatino Horado ne Garunta Ogua, Dahna nene agua tigundigowana ne Owata, a Tony Du Hawk name Guatni Gorna. Agwego and Scott Naji and did a walk with new Nini on Guatni Gorna, Dano Diatino Horada, ne Ojit down Gua, Dahno Nene Aqua, Tigun to go on and nail was a Dunyo Goa, a Tunian do Hockney and Guatni Gorna. Agwego and Scott Naji and did a walk with new Nini on Guatni Gorna, Dano Diatino Horada, Nega Yerdi, Niga Werdige, a Tunian do Hockney and Guatni Gorna. Agwego and Scott Naji and did a walk with new Nini and Guatni Gorna, Dano Diatino Horada, Ne Yoki Sotago, Ladi Wireless, a Tunian do Hockney and Guatni Gorna. Agwego and Scott Naji and did a walk with new Nini and Guatni Gorna, Dano Diatino Horada, Ne Cherowaji Agarakwa, a Tunian do Hockney and Guatni Gorna. Agwego and Scott Naji and did a walk with new Nini and Guatni Gorna, Dano Diatino Horada, Ne Yeti Sota Asintaneka Garakwa, a Tunian do Hockney and Guatni Gorna. Agwego and Scott Naji and did a walk with new Nini and Guatni Gorna, Dano the Cherowaji Horada, Dahno de Atino Horada, Ne Yoji Stokoruni, Jitkarun Hiade, a Tunian do Hockney and Guatni Gorna. Agwego and Scott Naji and did a walk with new Nini and Guatni Gorna, Dano the Cherowaji Horada, Nisangwaya Diso, a Tunian do Hockney and Guatni Gorna. Atanun dat gardi wa kweni jira hora gari menda kwa daga antano and get negorha awado easy as was kakwen nignu for the that not eto nigwanage donito. So nyawa everybody, just a reminder that the working groups will begin at 2:15 Pacific Standard Time, which is 5:15 Eastern Standard Time. There's a chance to discuss the themes and topics of the day with your fellow attendees in small groups. So please make sure to register through the link in the chat in order to receive the proper Zoom links. So with that, I say, Ona, Sewagwego, thank you all for coming or being a part of this with us. Yeah, that concludes our Indigenous Economics Conference.
Yay! Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.